You'll have no idea when I say I need justice, how bad I need justice for my daughter. I sit at this graveyard. My heart hurts so bad. I just want my baby. She's under the ground and I can't reach her. I can't even speak for her because of this stupid gag order. She has no voice and I have no voice. I'm trying to get justice for her and sometimes I don't know how. I want to come sit here for peace, but I can't find it. I can't find peace. I just want my child back. This is where she is.
Grandmother sits in her living room, phone in hand, recording a video call. On the other end of the screen, the man who killed her daughter is speaking. He doesn't know he's being recorded. He doesn't know that in 48 hours, this footage will be handed to cold case detectives. He doesn't know that his mother-in-law has become the investigator the police refused to be. She asks one simple question: what really happened that night? And he answers, but how did we get here? Welcome to Creepy True Crime. These are real stories about ordinary moments that turned dangerous. We don't just tell crimes, we harness fear for survival, because the fear you feel is the lesson you need. If you want to stay prepared, subscribe, like, and share with someone you want to keep safe. In July 2023, a 29-year-old mother was found unresponsive with a plastic bag taped around her neck. The medical examiner ruled it suicide. The case was closed. Her husband walked free, but her mother refused to accept it. She filed complaints, demanded reinvestigations, and when the system failed her, she turned to social media.
I need justice for my baby. I miss her so much. The justice system has an open homicide case, but tells me I'm not their only case, and therefore I'm turning to social media, which I don't know much about, but I need your help to get her story heard. Please help me get justice for my child.
What she uncovered wasn't just a murder disguised as suicide. It was a deliberate manipulation of evidence by the very people sworn to find the truth. Her daughter's journals went missing. Autopsy findings were misrepresented, and when fingerprints were found on the duct tape used to stage the scene, investigators said it still wasn't enough, so she confronted the killer herself and got him to confess on camera. April Lynn Holt spent her mornings the same way most entrepreneurs do. Coffee, scheduling, responding to messages. She ran a lash studio in Nashville. Over 200,000 people followed her on TikTok, where she posted about personal growth, spirituality, and starting over. Her content wasn't polished. It was raw, reflective, the kind that made strangers feel like friends. She had 2 children, a 12-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, an 8-year-old son with her husband, Donovan. In late July 2023, she was planning to meet her mother at church. She texted about it the night before. The kind of ordinary plan that becomes extraordinary only when it never happens. At the time, this detail seemed insignificant. But April had also been writing in her journal more frequently than usual. Entries about divorce, about being done for good, about financial strain and frustration with her husband's inability to contribute to rent. 2 weeks earlier, she'd filed for divorce. She hadn't told everyone yet, just the people closest to her. And in those final days, she wrote something else, something that would later be used against her in ways she could never have anticipated. Donovan Holt appeared to most who knew him as a father and husband navigating a difficult marriage. He worked inconsistently. Friends later described him as charming when he wanted to be, withdrawn when he wasn't. He and April had been together for years, but those years had grown increasingly tense. By July 2023, they were behind on rent, specifically Donovan's portion. Eviction was imminent. April's friends knew about the arguments, her family knew about the divorce filing, but no one outside the home saw what happened behind closed doors. But this wasn't the first time their name appeared in a conflict. Neighbors had heard raised voices before. April had confided in friends about feeling trapped, about wanting out. And in the days leading up to July 28th, something else had happened. Something deeply traumatic that April documented in her journal. She had been sexually assaulted by another man. This detail would later become central to Donovan's defense. Not because it explained what happened to April, but because it gave him a narrative to hide behind. April and Donovan's relationship had reached what therapists call the decision point, the moment where staying becomes more dangerous than leaving. April had made her decision. She'd filed paperwork, she'd told her mother, her friends, her daughter. She'd written in her journal that she wasn't having sex with Donovan anymore, that she was done. Donovan, meanwhile, faced a reality he couldn't control. Divorce meant financial exposure, loss of access to April's income, potential custody battles, and public acknowledgement of failure. The apartment they shared was no longer a home, it was a pressure cooker. On July 27th, April texted her mother about meeting at church the next day. She seemed tired, but hopeful. She was making plans.
The morning that she had passed away, that she was killed, she was just sitting there drinking coffee and journaling in her journal, just as she always did, and giving her little boy a kiss and a hug on. And then she had texted me. It was 12:59, and she texted me and she said, "Hey Mom, I'm not gonna be able to go to the Barbie movie with you today, but I'll meet you at church tomorrow to help you teach in the middle school classroom."
The morning of July 28th began like any other. April was home with her son, her 8-year-old. Donovan was there too. At some point that morning, April and Donovan argued. Their son heard it. What he heard, and what he later told investigators, would become one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence in the case. The timeline of July 28, 2023, is measured in moments that can't be undone. April was in the bathroom. Donovan was outside it. Their son was nearby. What happened in that bathroom would later be described by Donovan himself, but not to police. Not initially. Not until someone forced him to. After the argument, Donovan did something that still defies explanation. He sent his 7-year-old son into the bathroom to check on his mother. The boy found her unresponsive, a plastic bag taped tightly around her neck. Emergency services were called. April was rushed to the hospital. She died 3 days later, on July 31, 2023, from complications of suffocation. No one there realized this was the last normal moment.
He started to tell me how his dad was in the bathroom with his mom that morning and that they were fighting. And he looked under the door and he said they were both standing. And then they were fighting some more and he looked back under the door and he said he saw his mom on the ground.
But even before April's death was officially pronounced, a narrative was already forming. Not about murder. About suicide. Donovan told first responders that April had been struggling mentally, that she'd been assaulted days earlier, that she hadn't been herself. And investigators, perhaps too quickly, began to believe him.
If something isn't right within your family and that you knew something happened to somebody, fight for what you know is right. Start your own investigations into the investigations that they did, because they're corrupt. They are corrupt. So I want to give you guys an example. This right here is part of the investigation report that I have been given. What it says down here at the bottom is that it says one page had 2 websites listed and no other information. So they are listing websites that they're saying that my daughter went on. And this is what the detective himself put in my daughter's report. Now, mind you, they've claimed up here offense classified as suicide. They put that she committed suicide. So they put that at the top right here. April Holt, suicide. This report was done by Mike Rowland himself. It says she looked at a site called atrrecovery.com. Any one of you with a phone right now can look up what that site says. Any one of you. atrrecovery.com. Then he goes further and he decides to put down here what that site is. And it says it is the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for emotional and substance use support. Look it up right now on your phone. This site is for a car repossession. It is not a suicide site. He planted this false information on my daughter's report and has not been held liable yet. I've placed claims. They will not hold them liable. They said that they're immune. They're immune to their actions. They're immune to what they've done, and it is not okay. This site is literally for a car repossession site. And I sat down and I talked to Mike Rowland up here, and I called him into a meeting and I said, so why is this on my daughter's report? And he said, oh, that must have been a previous search on my computer. Bullshit. That is not a previous search on your computer. You put false information on there so that people would think that my daughter committed suicide when it was a murder because you didn't want to listen to me, that nobody was doing their job.
What actually happened in that bathroom didn't emerge until nearly a year later. According to Donovan's eventual confession, he and April were engaged in what he claimed was a consensual sex act involving asphyxiation. He said it went wrong, that she stopped breathing, that he panicked. But instead of calling for help immediately, Donovan made a series of calculated decisions. He strangled her to ensure she wouldn't survive to contradict his story. He dragged her body to the shower. He retrieved a roll of duct tape. He taped a plastic bag around her head, positioning it to look self-inflicted. Then, and only then, he sent his young son to discover her. And then, the situation crossed a line it could never return from. The staging was deliberate. The duct tape was wound multiple times. The bag was sealed. This wasn't panic, it was planning. But Donovan had made one critical mistake. He'd touched the duct tape with his bare hands.
There was only his fingerprints. None of her fingerprints were on the bag or the tape. How would she put a bag over her head with no fingerprints?
When paramedics arrived, they found April unresponsive with a plastic bag taped around her neck. The scene was unusual. The tape was tight, too tight for someone in distress to have managed alone. There were bruises on April's wrists, neck, ankles, and thighs. But in the chaos of trying to save her life, those details weren't immediately flagged as suspicious. April was transported to the hospital, where she remained on life support for 3 days. During that time, her mother, Jamie Dickerson, arrived and noticed something that would haunt her: the bruises. She asked doctors about them. She asked police about them. The answers she received were vague, dismissive. This detail would later challenge the initial narrative.
And we sat down with the DA and the investigators, and we read over her autopsy, and I questioned them. They said they didn't see any signs of trauma, and I said, well, her body had bruising on her neck, her wrists, her ankles, her thigh had a cut and a big bruise on it, and they said, we didn't see those. That might have been from the EMTs, and they just disregarded it.
When April died on July 31st, the investigation should have shifted to homicide. Instead, it moved toward closure. Donovan repeated his story. April had been depressed, she'd been assaulted, she'd been journaling about dark thoughts. He was cooperative, tearful, seemingly devastated. And in November 2023, the medical examiner's office issued its ruling. Suicide by suffocation. The case was closed. Jamie Dickerson walked out of the meeting where officials announced the case closure and said 5 words: "I'm not done investigating." She wasn't a detective. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a mother who knew her daughter and knew this wasn't suicide. She filed complaints with the police department. She demanded reinvestigations. She reviewed autopsy reports and discovered something shocking. Key findings had been misrepresented. The bruises on April's body, which Jamie had photographed and reported, weren't mentioned in the official narrative presented to the DA's office. Investigators would soon realize something didn't add up. Jamie spent 2 to 3 hours every single day reviewing documents, filing Freedom of Information requests, and tracking down witnesses. She discovered that some of April's journals, the ones that might have contradicted the suicide narrative, had gone missing. She also learned that detectives had built their case around a specific version of April's mental state, one based on selectively chosen journal entries that painted her as unstable. Meanwhile, Donovan's own writings, which reportedly showed no signs of remorse or concern, were framed as evidence of his innocence. The manipulation was systemic.
So here's where we are. We're into the investigation, and for the last few days I've been telling you guys about a few of the things that have been false on my daughter's reports by the Nashville Metro Police Department. and then into her journals about how now we're working into a narrative that the investigators started to build on themselves. From the very beginning, they started to build a narrative towards suicide instead of looking into this as a homicide. And so we're going to follow through with that. That's where we're picking up. So here we go. And on page 4 of this report, it says, in April's journals where she said, I'm embarrassed, I feel ashamed, I don't want people to know or asking or judging or getting involved. I just want to be alone and act like it didn't happen. I know I'm supposed to go to the ER and put in a police report. So a few days prior to April being killed, she ended up having a sexual assault that I was not aware of. Donovan was aware because April came home very late, at like 4 o'clock in the morning, had no idea what had happened to her. She obviously, somebody put something in her drink. She was working for a man that was paying her to manage his rental homes, like Airbnb, apartments, things like that in Nashville. This same man, who is in his upper 50s, I'm not allowed to mention his name because his name is not in this report, although he knows exactly who he is because I've called him out several times, and his wife knows what he's done. And so this individual that is in Nashville, mind you, everybody watch out, he ended up putting something in her drink. I've read their text messages. She's asked why. He still claims he didn't. So she did not know what happened. She came home late. Donovan was pissed. But think about it. From that moment on, Donovan now is like, hey, now I have motive. So April had already asked for her divorce 2 weeks prior to all of this happening. She had asked for her divorce. Her divorce papers were on the counter. But now he had motive, because now when all of this went down that day, he told everybody that it's because April wasn't in her right mind, that she was sexually assaulted 2 days prior, and that she wasn't in her right mind that morning. That's why she took her life, that she just wasn't handling it, that she wasn't in her right mind. All of these things. I had gotten a text from April a few hours before she had passed away, before she was killed, and none of that indicated any of that. Nothing indicated that. I didn't even know about the assault. So later on, I did find out that she did go to the ER. She does have a report, but she did not go and put the police report in because she was killed. So she never got a chance to. So that guy got away with it and walks around Nashville. So there's criminal number 2 that is in Nashville amongst us all. So that's where that narrative all started. That's where it all started. That's why he said she wasn't in her right mind that morning. I have the ER reports of her claim of her sexual assault. They were sending her to Nashville to have additional testing done, but she never went. So that's what I'm at. That's the point I'm at, is that they started to use that, and they started to put that in her report, and that's because her husband told them that's what went on. That's why she wasn't in her right mind, and that's where they started going off of the suicide, not even thinking about the fact that they should be questioning the husband and that she wanted a divorce. None of that was being questioned. They went straight into the sexual assault. And so all of that happened, and so that is where we leave you with how that narrative began. I'm trying to see. So we went into the websites that were false, all of that, and how they started picking things out of her journal, things they wanted to write down that had to talk about her negative thoughts, wrote nothing about her positive thoughts. And I have stacks of journals of positive thoughts. Earlier on, when she passed away, I would read some of those thoughts about how she was feeling and her happier thoughts and her peaceful moments. They didn't want to add that in there. And so in here, and then they put in here about Donovan, they only wrote his his positive thoughts, saying truly value friendship and relationship with April. Started picking it out, started placing it in there, started planting seeds of all these thoughts of what was going on. So this is when our Detective Timothy Skopek decides, hey, I'm also going to go into the autopsy room, and I'm going to tell them that I didn't see any signs of foul play, and that we believe that this was a suicide, and that she had a drug and alcohol medical history, drug and alcohol problem. There's no medical history of drug and alcohol problem. I said, show it to me. There is none. This is just what Donovan claimed. So he goes in and he tells the medical examiner this, who then goes with that as the narrative for my daughter's death certificate. Yeah, guys, that's where it all started from. Didn't want to listen to me at all.
When Jamie pushed harder, demanding the case be reopened as a homicide, Internal Affairs launched a review. In that review, forensic analysts re-examined the duct tape used to seal the bag around April's head. They found 2 fingerprints. Both belonged to Donovan Holt. Jamie Dickerson took the fingerprint evidence back to police and said, "Now will you arrest him?" The answer was no. Investigators told her that fingerprints on duct tape weren't enough to prove murder. Donovan could claim he'd touched the tape at some other time. They needed a confession. So Jamie decided to get one herself. In June 2024, she contacted Donovan and told him he had a choice: tell her the truth, or she would go to the cold case department and make sure this case never stayed buried. Donovan agreed to talk. Jamie recorded the call. But justice in this case came at a cost. During the FaceTime conversation, Donovan admitted he'd accidentally killed April during a sex act. He admitted he'd strangled her. He admitted he'd dragged her to the shower and taped a bag over her face to stage a suicide. Jamie handed the recording to the Metro Nashville Police Department's cold case unit. In July 2024, detectives traveled to Texas, where Donovan had relocated, and confronted him with the evidence. He confessed again. This time, officially. On February 18, 2025, Donovan Holt stood before a judge and received his sentence: 2 years and 1 month in prison. He pleaded guilty to reckless homicide, tampering with evidence, and false reporting. After serving his prison time, he will spend 8 years under community corrections, meaning he'll live at home, under supervision, but not behind bars. Jamie Dickerson stood in that courtroom and called it a slap in the face. Her granddaughter, April's 12-year-old daughter, had written a letter to the DA's office begging for justice for her mother. Her grandson, April's 8-year-old son, now lives happily with his grandparents. He has openly stated that his father is responsible for his mother's death.
So lately, I haven't really been feeling that happy. I've been feeling mad, sad. I feel like my dad's the one who did everything. I feel like my dad's the one who always made my mom mad or sad, and my dad, he's pretty guilty.
Both children will grow up knowing that the man who killed their mother served less time than some people serve for nonviolent drug offenses. The DA's office justified the plea deal by explaining that going to trial risked even less time, or worse, an acquittal that would erase the felony charges entirely. Jamie was told this was the best they could do. But April's children deserved better. April deserved better. This case reveals something more dangerous than one man's violence. It reveals how easily the system can be manipulated when bias takes hold. From the beginning, investigators chose to see April as unstable rather than endangered. They emphasized her trauma, the sexual assault she'd endured days before her death, as evidence of suicidal ideation rather than as a factor that made her more vulnerable to her husband's control. They accepted Donovan's narrative without scrutinizing the physical evidence that contradicted it. They closed the case before the family could grieve. And when a determined mother refused to accept their conclusions, they told her even a confession wasn't enough. Jamie Dickerson has since turned her grief into action. She's raising funds to open a grief center in Nashville called Grieve With Me, a place where families who've lost loved ones to violence can find support. She's also become an advocate on social media, posting videos about police corruption, missing evidence, and the manipulation of domestic violence cases. Her message is clear. When the system fails, families shouldn't have to become investigators. But until the system changes, they will. April Lynn Holt was a mother, a businesswoman, a creator, and a woman trying to escape a dangerous marriage. Her story didn't have to end the way it did. If investigators had taken the bruises seriously, if they'd questioned the staged scene, if they'd listened to her family instead of her killer, April might have gotten justice without her mother having to fight for it. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788. Thank you for watching Creepy True Crime. We tell these stories so they don't happen to you. If you value these lessons, hit the like button and subscribe to sharpen your instincts. Share this video to spread the warning. Remember, the world is only as safe as you are aware. Stay vigilant.